Today in Colombia we'll be marching to protest the ongoing assassinations of social and community leaders. But it's not just in Colombia where those bravely defending their people and their natural world are being eliminated. What can we do about it? Welcome to Development Unspun. Colombia is living through a new wave of murder. In what should have been a hopeful new era for the country as the armed conflict with the FARC rebels is formally ended, actually what we're seeing is the same old group of landowners, politicians and bureaucrats conspiring with the men of violence to eliminate anyone that stands in the way of their accumulation of power and money, all on the back of already poor and marginalised communities. Communities that don't seek great progress for themselves, but just to exist in peace and dignity. Today we'll march in the streets of Bogota protesting the complete failure of the current government to get to grips with this problem, in part because many in the government have contacts with those who benefit from and promote this situation. But as anyone who's been following the news will know, this phenomenon is not limited to Colombia. Just south of here in the Brazilian Amazon, the murder of community and social leaders has become more commonplace since Jair Bolsonaro was elected president, and it coincides with higher deforestation rates. From the Philippines to Indonesia, from India to Sri Lanka, from Guatemala and Mexico down to Chile, from Kenya to Congo, it's the countries that aren't experiencing this problem which are the exceptions. It's as old as the hills. Rich and powerful interests pushing poorer communities off their lands for their own gain. But it's getting worse. According to Global Witness, hundreds of activists have been murdered in the last year, a record level. The stories are always tragic, always heroic, and most of the killing takes place in countries which have rich natural and mineral resources. Countries which would not be described as low income but rather middle income. It's not extreme poverty that is the problem here, but extreme inequality of wealth and power. Seldom have those calling for the international development sector to withdraw their resources and focus from middle-income countries. Seldom have they looked more out of sync. Those of us working in this sector must redouble our efforts to support human rights and development in all countries, including middle income. But how? Most people conceive of international development NGOs as conduits of money from the rich north to the poor south. After all, the marketing campaigns are usually full of pictures of poor people looking cash-strapped and desperate. But when I ran an international NGO here in Colombia, I lost count of the amount of times that our partners would tell us it's not the money that we most appreciate from you. It's the political presence, it's the solidarity, it's the fact that you stand with us in our difficult times. Sure, that's in a country that's relatively well off compared to much of the developing world, but I think that's the point. Assuming and hoping that the world's poorest countries continue to do better and reduce poverty and gradually shift over that middle income threshold, the problems they face will be less associated with the absolute lack of money. But while we can expect the traditional development indicators such as access to health, access to good education to improve in the next few years, the same cannot be said about conflict over land and natural resources. There are strong reasons to believe that we live in a more peaceful time than ever before, and data compiled by people like Hans Rosling confirm this. But new resource scarcity, coupled with ancient human selfishness, are beginning to undermine this apparent progress. The future challenge for international development NGOs will be to discern and respond to new problems related to resource scarcity, volatility and conflict. And the lens will be power and equality. If this is what the future holds, we'll need a strong and principled global civil society. Not charity for, but solidarity with marginalised communities. And organisations like Peace Brigades International, Global Witness and Frontline Defenders are leading the way. As brave leaders are threatened for speaking out in favour of poor communities, these organisations start living in the house next door, walking them to work, publishing stories about them in the international media. As the eyes of the world turn to these stories, the gunmen are deterred for a while. Another reason I like these organisations is the challenge they implicitly make to the results agenda in which so many international NGOs are caught up. NGOs are under pressure to claim huge results for great numbers of people, but human rights defenders apply a different logic. Their beneficiary is often just one person, say a human rights lawyer or a community activist, and their result is that nothing happened. Another day, and he or she is still alive. By aligning themselves with human rights defenders and communities for the long haul, they hark back to an era when NGOs were more about solidarity than glossy annual reports. I think many of us in the global development sector, especially based in the north, find it hard to understand the reality of power. When things aren't going well, we assume there's a technical or social or historical problem that isn't being overcome. I think there's a naivety. We find it hard to understand the brains and the hearts of people who coldly order murder. But this is no time for naivety. This is a battle between good and evil. And that's why we'll be marching today in Bogota.